Gunfire crackled in the distance as Rebecca Daniels stumbled through the rugged terrain of Colorado's eastern plains, her once pristine white blouse now stained with dirt and blood that wasn't her own. The year was 1876, and for the past 3 days she had been running from the men who murdered her father and burned their small ranch to the ground. The summer heat was merciless, beating down on her sunburned skin as she pushed forward, her legs trembling with each step. Her throat burned with thirst, and her stomach cramped from hunger. She had nothing but the clothes on her back and her father's pocket watch tucked safely in her skirt pocket. The watch was the only thing she'd managed to grab before fleeing into the night as flames consumed the only home she'd ever known. Rebecca paused, leaning against a large boulder to catch her breath. Her fingers brushed against her tangled hair, once a beautiful shade of copper that her father said reminded him of her mother. Now it was a matted mess, filled with twigs, dirt, and dried sweat. She winced as her fingers caught in a particularly stubborn knot. In the distance, she spotted a thin line of smoke rising above the trees. Civilization. Perhaps there she could find help, or at least water. With renewed determination, Rebecca pushed herself away from the boulder and continued her journey, each step a painful reminder of the miles she had already traveled. As she approached the source of the smoke, Rebecca realized it was a small ranch house nestled in a valley. A modest barn stood nearby, and a corral held several horses that lifted their heads at her approach. The house itself was well maintained, with a wide porch and sturdy walls. It looked safe, but Rebecca had learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving. She hesitated at the edge of the property, debating whether to approach or continue on her way. The decision was made for her when her legs finally gave out, and she collapsed in the tall grass, her vision blurring as exhaustion overwhelmed her. When Rebecca regained consciousness, she was lying on something soft. A bed. The realization sent a jolt of panic through her, and she tried to sit up only to have firm hands gently push her back down. "Easy there, miss. You're safe now." The voice was deep and reassuring, with a slight drawl that marked him as local. Rebecca blinked several times, bringing the face above her into focus. He was young, perhaps in his mid-20s, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a clear summer sky. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the nape of his neck. "Who are you?" Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper, her throat too dry for anything more. The man reached for a glass of water on a nearby table and helped her drink. "Name's Kieran Wade. This is my ranch you collapsed on." He studied her face with concern. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" Rebecca finished the water before answering. "You could say that." Kieran's eyes moved to her hair, and a small frown appeared between his brows. "Your hair was matted from days on the run," he said softly, not a question but a statement of fact. "There's a bath and time to heal here if you want it." Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes at the simple kindness, and she quickly blinked them away. "Why would you help me? You don't even know who I am." "I know you're someone in need," Kieran replied, setting the empty glass aside. "And my ma raised me to never turn away someone who needs help." He stood up, his tall frame casting a shadow across the bed. "Rest now. We'll talk more when you're stronger." Before he could leave, Rebecca reached out and caught his wrist. "Rebecca Daniels," she said. "My name is Rebecca Daniels." Kieran nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Daniels. Now get some sleep." As he left the room, closing the door softly behind him, Rebecca sank back into the pillows. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to relax, if only a little. The danger hadn't passed. She was certain the men who had attacked her home were still hunting her, but for now, she was safe. Outside the bedroom, Kieran Wade leaned against the wall, a troubled expression on his face. The woman in his guest room was clearly running from something or someone, and he had a feeling that whatever it was would eventually follow her here. His hand moved to the revolver strapped to his hip, a habit born of years spent in a land where danger was as common as the sagebrush. He pushed away from the wall and headed to the kitchen. There was stew simmering on the stove, and he figured his unexpected guest would be hungry when she woke. As he stirred the pot, his mind turned to the state she'd been in when he found her clothes torn and dirty, hair a tangled mess, face smudged with dirt, and what looked suspiciously like blood. There was a story there, and not a pleasant one. Kieran had come to Colorado 5 years ago, after the war had ended, and there was nothing left for him in Tennessee. His parents were gone, their farm taken for taxes, and his 2 brothers had died fighting for the Confederacy. He'd headed west with nothing but his horse and the skills his father had taught him, eventually settling in this quiet valley near Cherry Creek, Colorado. He'd built this place with his own hands, turning wild land into a modest but profitable cattle ranch. It was a solitary life, but a good one. He had a few hands who worked for him during the busy seasons, but most of the time it was just him and his animals. He liked the quiet, the simplicity of it. There were no complicated people to deal with, no expectations to meet other than his own. But now there was a woman in his guest room, a woman with trouble following her like a shadow. Kieran sighed, knowing he couldn't just send her on her way, not in her condition. Whatever trouble she was in, he was now part of it. When Rebecca awoke again, the light coming through the window had changed, indicating it was late afternoon. She sat up slowly, her body aching, but her mind clearer than it had been in days. The room was simple but comfortable, with a bed, a small dresser, and a rocking chair in the corner. A quilt covered the bed, its pattern faded, but still beautiful. The door opened and Kieran entered, carrying a tray with a bowl of stew, bread, and another glass of water. "You're awake," he said, setting the tray on a small table beside the bed. "Thought you might be hungry." Rebecca's stomach growled at the sight of the food, and she nodded gratefully. "Thank you." As she ate, Kieran sat in the rocking chair, watching her with those clear blue eyes. "When you're ready," he said quietly. "I've got hot water for a bath, and I found some clothes that might fit you. They belonged to my sister-in-law before—" He trailed off, a shadow crossing his face. Rebecca paused, her spoon halfway to her mouth. "I'm sorry," she said, though she wasn't sure what she was apologizing for. Kieran shrugged. It was a long time ago. Cholera took both her and my brother. I kept some of her things, though I don't rightly know why." Rebecca resumed eating, the stew rich and flavorful. When she finished, she set the empty bowl aside and met Kieran's gaze. "I should tell you why I'm here," she said, "what I'm running from." "Only if you want to," Kieran replied, his expression neutral. Rebecca took a deep breath. "My father and I had a small ranch about 30 miles east of here. 3 days ago, a group of men rode onto our property. They said they represented the Rocky Mountain Land Company, that our land now belonged to them. My father tried to explain that we had the deed, that the land was legally ours, but they didn't care." Her voice broke, and she had to pause before continuing. "They shot him, right in front of me. Then they set fire to our house. I managed to slip away in the confusion, but they saw me escape. They've been hunting me ever since." Kieran's face had hardened as she spoke, his jaw tight with anger. "These men, do you know who they are?" Rebecca shook her head. "The leader called himself Blackwell, that's all I know." Kieran stood abruptly, pacing the small room. "I've heard of this Rocky Mountain Land Company. They've been buying up small ranches all over the territory, by force if necessary. The law doesn't do much, too many officials have been bought off." He stopped pacing and faced her. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need to. But I won't lie to you, Miss Daniels. If these men are as determined as you say, they'll eventually track you here." "I don't want to bring trouble to your door," Rebecca said, though the thought of leaving the safety of this place filled her with dread. "Trouble has a way of finding me regardless," Kieran said with a wry smile. "Besides, I can't in good conscience send you back out there, not when you're barely able to stand." Rebecca felt a surge of gratitude, but also a nagging guilt. "I can work," she offered. "I'm good with horses, and I can cook and clean." "We'll figure that out later," Kieran said, waving away her offer. "For now, let's get you that bath. Then you can rest some more." The bath was heavenly. Kieran had set it up in a small room off the kitchen, giving her privacy while he went to tend to his horses. The hot water soothed Rebecca's aching muscles, and she scrubbed away days of dirt and fear. Her hair was a different matter. The tangles were so severe that she feared she might have to cut it off. After her bath, wrapped in a borrowed robe, Rebecca sat in a chair by the kitchen stove, while Kieran, with unexpected gentleness, worked a comb through her hair. It was an intimate act, one that would have been scandalous in normal circumstances, but there was nothing inappropriate in his manner. He worked methodically, starting at the ends and slowly working his way up, using a mixture of water and what smelled like lavender oil to ease the tangles. "My mother used to do this for my sister," he explained when he caught Rebecca's surprised look. "And later, I sometimes helped my sister-in-law when she was ill." "You're very good at it," Rebecca murmured, relaxing under his careful ministrations. "It's just patience," Kieran replied. "Something I've got in abundance, according to my ranch hands." It took nearly an hour, but eventually Kieran had worked through all the tangles, leaving Rebecca's hair damp but smooth. He stepped back, seeming almost embarrassed now that the task was complete. "There's clothes in the room where you were sleeping," he said, turning to stir the stew that was once again simmering on the stove. "Nothing fancy, but they should fit well enough." Rebecca thanked him and retreated to the bedroom, finding a simple blue calico dress laid out on the bed, along with undergarments and a pair of sturdy boots that were only slightly too large. The dress fit reasonably well, though it was a bit loose in the bodice. When she returned to the kitchen, Kieran was setting the table. "Looks nice," he said, glancing up at her. "Sarah was a bit taller than you, but the dress suits you." They ate dinner in companionable silence, and Rebecca found herself studying her host. He was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. There was a quietness about him that she found reassuring, a steadiness that contrasted sharply with the chaos of the past few days. After dinner, as Rebecca helped wash the dishes, Kieran outlined his plan. "I'll ride into town tomorrow, see what I can find out about this Rocky Mountain Land Company. I've got a friend who works at the land office in Cherry Creek who might know something." "I should go with you," Rebecca said, drying a plate with more force than necessary. Kieran shook his head. "Too risky. If these men are looking for you, they might have someone watching the town. Better you stay here out of sight." Rebecca wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. Besides, she was still weak from her ordeal, her body demanding more rest despite the hours she had already slept. "Be careful," she said instead. "These men, they don't hesitate to kill." "I've been taking care of myself for a long time, Miss Daniels," Kieran said, his voice gentle despite the firmness of his words. "I'll be fine." That night, lying in the comfortable bed, Rebecca listened to the sounds of the ranch settling around her. In the distance, a coyote howled, answered by another farther away. The wind rustled through the trees outside her window, and somewhere in the house, a board creaked as it cooled in the night air. These normal, peaceful sounds were a stark contrast to the terrifying nights she had spent hiding in the wilderness, starting at every sound, certain that each moment would be her last. She thought of Kieran, sleeping in his room across the hall. A stranger who had taken her in without question offered her safety and help with no expectation of repayment. Such kindness was rare in her experience. Her father had been a good man, but hard and often distant, especially after her mother's death when Rebecca was just 12. The years since had been focused on survival, on making their small ranch profitable enough to sustain them. Now her father was gone, their home destroyed, and Rebecca was alone in the world. The thought brought tears to her eyes, and she allowed herself to cry silently, mourning not only her father, but the life she had lost. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Morning came with the sound of roosters crowing and the distant lowing of cattle. Rebecca dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, finding it empty, but with a fire already burning in the stove and coffee brewing. Through the window, she could see Kieran in the corral, working with a young horse, guiding it around the enclosure with a long lead rope. Rebecca found a cup and poured herself some coffee, then set about making breakfast. By the time Kieran came in, she had bacon frying and biscuits in the oven. He paused in the doorway, surprise evident on his face. "You didn't have to do this," he said, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. "I wanted to," Rebecca replied, flipping the bacon. "Seems only fair, given everything you've done for me." Kieran washed up at the sink, then sat at the table as Rebecca served breakfast. "I'll be heading into town after we eat," he said, buttering a biscuit. "Probably won't be back until late afternoon. There's a rifle in the cabinet by the door, if you need it." Rebecca nodded, her appetite diminishing at the reminder of the danger that still lurked. "I'll be fine," she assured him, though she wasn't entirely confident of that fact. After breakfast, Kieran saddled his horse, a handsome bay gelding with a white blaze on its face. "Stay close to the house," he advised as he mounted up. "If you hear riders coming, hide in the root cellar. It's behind the pantry, hidden by the rug." Rebecca stood on the porch, watching as he rode away, his figure growing smaller until it disappeared over a rise. Then she turned back to the house, determined to make herself useful during his absence. There was bread to bake, floors to sweep, and plenty of other chores to keep her hands and mind occupied. The day passed slowly, with Rebecca constantly pausing in her work to listen for the sound of approaching riders. By mid-afternoon, she had cleaned the kitchen, swept the entire house, and baked enough bread to last a week. She was just considering what to prepare for dinner when she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. Her heart racing, Rebecca moved to the window, peering out cautiously. A rider was approaching, but it wasn't Kieran. This man was heavier, his horse a dappled gray that she didn't recognize. Without hesitation, Rebecca grabbed the rifle from the cabinet, checked that it was loaded, then hurried to the pantry. She moved the rug aside, revealing a trap door that led to the root cellar below. The cellar was cool and dark, with shelves lining the walls, stocked with preserved fruits, vegetables, and other supplies. Rebecca closed the trap door above her, then settled in to wait, the rifle clutched in her hands. Above, she could hear the heavy tread of boots on the porch, then a pounding on the door. "Hello? Anybody home?" The voice was gruff, unfamiliar. Rebecca held her breath, praying the man would believe the house was empty and leave. But instead, she heard the door open and footsteps enter the house. The man moved through the rooms, his steps unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. Rebecca's fingers tightened on the rifle, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain the intruder must hear it. The footsteps paused outside the pantry door, and Rebecca raised the rifle, aiming it at the trap door above her. The door to the pantry opened, and the footsteps entered. There was a moment of silence, then the rug was pulled aside, and the trap door lifted. Rebecca's finger tightened on the trigger, but before she could fire, a familiar voice called out, "Rebecca! It's me, Kieran!" Relief flooded through her, so intense she nearly dropped the rifle. "Kieran?" she called back, her voice shaking. The trapdoor opened fully, revealing Kieran's concerned face. "It's safe," he assured her, reaching down to help her up. "That's just Samuel, one of my hands. He's been up in the north pasture for the past week." Rebecca allowed him to pull her up from the cellar, embarrassed by her reaction. "I'm sorry. I heard a rider and thought—" "You did exactly what I told you to do," Kieran interrupted, his hand lingering on her arm. "No need to apologize for being cautious." In the kitchen, a large man with a bushy beard stood awkwardly, hat in hand. "Sorry if I scared you, madam," he said, nodding respectfully. "Didn't know Mr. Wade had company." "Samuel, this is Miss Rebecca Daniels," Kieran said, making the introductions. "She'll be staying with us for a while. Miss Daniels, this is Samuel Cooper, my most reliable hand." Samuel's eyebrows rose slightly at the news of Rebecca's extended stay, but he said nothing beyond a polite, "Pleased to meet you, madam." After Samuel had gone to the bunkhouse to rest, Kieran filled Rebecca in on what he had learned in town. "The Rocky Mountain Land Company is real enough," he said, sitting at the kitchen table while Rebecca prepared dinner. "They've been buying up land all over the territory, supposedly for a railroad that's coming through. But the railroad surveyors haven't even been to this part of Colorado yet." "So they're just taking land on the chance it might be valuable someday?" Rebecca asked, outraged. "That's part of it. Kieran agreed, his expression grim. But I think there's more to it. My friend at the land office says there are rumors of gold in the eastern foothills. Not a major strike, but enough to make the land worth a lot more than what they're paying for it or taking by force. My father's land is nowhere near the foothills, Rebecca pointed out. No, but it is near Cherry Creek, and water rights are just as valuable as gold in these parts, Kieran explained, especially if someone is planning to set up mining operations. Rebecca turned from the stove to face him. Did you find out anything about the men who killed my father? Kieran's expression softened. The name Blackwell didn't ring any bells with the folks I talked to, but there was a group of men in town yesterday, strangers asking questions about a young woman with red hair. They claimed she was a relative who had run away from home. Rebecca felt a chill run through her. They're looking for me. Yes, but they left town heading west, away from here, Kieran assured her. No one mentioned my ranch or gave them any reason to think you might be here. Despite his reassurances, Rebecca felt the walls closing in. I should leave, she said, her voice barely audible. I'm putting you and your ranch at risk just by being here. Kieran stood and crossed to her, his hands gentle as he turned her to face him. You're not going anywhere, he said firmly. Not until we figure this out. I didn't bring you here just to send you back out there to fend for yourself. The intensity in his eyes made Rebecca's breath catch. Why are you doing this? She asked. You don't know me, don't owe me anything. Maybe I'm tired of being alone, Kieran said, his voice low. Or maybe I just can't stand by and watch while someone suffers. He released her and stepped back, as if suddenly aware of how close they were standing. Either way, you're staying, at least until we can be sure you're safe. Rebecca wanted to argue, to insist that she couldn't accept such generosity, but the truth was, she had nowhere else to go. Her father's friends were few and scattered, and she had no other family. Thank you, she said instead, turning back to the stove to hide the tears that threatened to fall. Dinner was a quiet affair, with Samuel joining them and keeping the conversation light with tales of his week in the North pasture. Rebecca found herself warming to the big man, whose gruff exterior hid a gentle nature and dry wit. After the meal, Samuel returned to the bunkhouse, leaving Rebecca and Kieran alone. I should turn in, Rebecca said, suddenly self-conscious. It's been a long day. Kieran nodded, standing to clear the dishes. I'll be up for a while yet. Got some paperwork to catch up on. In her room, Rebecca prepared for bed, her mind racing with all that had happened. The men hunting her were still out there, perhaps already turning back toward Cherry Creek. How long before they found her? And what would happen to Kieran and his ranch if they did? She lay awake for hours, listening to the sounds of the house, hearing Kieran move about in his study before finally retiring to his own room. Only then did she allow herself to relax, slipping into a fitful sleep filled with dreams of fire and gunshots and men with cold, merciless eyes. The next morning broke clear and bright, the sun streaming through Rebecca's window and waking her from what had finally become a restful sleep. She dressed quickly in another of Sarah's dresses, this one a soft green that complemented her red hair. In the kitchen, she found Kieran already up cooking breakfast. I thought I'd make myself useful today, Rebecca said, pouring herself a cup of coffee. Maybe help with the horses. I noticed one of your mares seems close to foaling. Kieran glanced up from the stove, surprise evident on his face. You know horses. My father raised quarter horses, Rebecca explained. I've been helping with foaling since I was old enough to hold a lead rope. A smile spread across Kieran's face. Well then, I'd be a fool to turn down that kind of help. Moonbeam is due any day now, and I was worried about leaving her alone while I tended to the other chores. After breakfast, they headed to the barn together. The mare, a beautiful black with a white crescent on her forehead, whickered softly as they approached. Rebecca entered the stall slowly, talking in a low, soothing voice as she ran her hands over the horse's distended belly. She's close, Rebecca confirmed, patting the mare's neck. Probably within the next day or two. Kieran leaned against the stall door, watching her with those intense blue eyes. You're good with her. Most strangers she won't let near. Animals know when you respect them, Rebecca said, stepping out of the stall. My father taught me that. He said horses can sense fear and dishonesty better than most people. Your father sounds like a wise man, Kieran said, leading her toward the tack room. I'm sorry for what happened to him. Rebecca swallowed hard, the grief still fresh. He was a good man, stubborn, sometimes too proud for his own good, but fair and honest. He didn't deserve to die that way. No one does, Kieran said quietly. Then, changing the subject, he gestured to the saddles lining the wall. I need to ride out to check the herd today. Would you like to come along? Might do you good to get some fresh air. The invitation surprised Rebecca. Are you sure it's safe? We'll stay on my property, Kieran assured her, and if we spot any riders, we'll head back immediately. The thought of being outside on horseback was too tempting to resist. I'd like that, Rebecca agreed. Kieran saddled 2 horses, his bay gelding for himself, and a gentle chestnut mare for Rebecca. The day was perfect for riding, with a cool breeze that carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. As they rode across the rolling grassland, Rebecca felt some of her tension ease. There was a rhythm to riding that had always soothed her, a connection between horse and rider that required focus and trust. Kieran's cattle were scattered across the valley, grazing contentedly on the rich grass. They rode among them, Kieran occasionally pointing out a new calf or a cow he was particularly proud of. Rebecca was impressed with the quality of his herd. They were healthy and well cared for, a testament to his skill as a rancher. They stopped for lunch on a hill overlooking the valley, spreading a blanket under the shade of a lone cottonwood tree. Kieran had packed bread, cheese, and apples, a simple meal that tasted wonderful in the open air. As they ate, he told her about his journey west after the war, the hardships he had faced and overcome, the dream that had driven him to this remote valley. My brother David and I came out here together, he explained, leaning back against the tree trunk. He was older, had a wife and big plans. We were going to build a cattle empire. A sad smile crossed his face. Then the cholera came through in 71. Took half the town of Cherry Creek, including David and Sarah. I nearly gave up, nearly sold everything, and went back east. What changed your mind? Rebecca asked, fascinated by this glimpse into his past. Kieran shrugged. Stubbornness, maybe, or the knowledge that there was nothing left for me back there. So I stayed, built this place up on my own. It's not the empire David dreamed of, but it's a good life. It's beautiful, Rebecca said sincerely, gesturing to the valley spread out before them. You've created something special here. Kieran's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, a connection that made Rebecca's heart skip a beat. Then he looked away, clearing his throat. We should head back. I want to check on Moonbeam before evening. The ride back was quieter, each lost in their own thoughts. Rebecca found herself stealing glances at Kieran, noticing the way the sun brought out golden highlights in his dark hair, the strong line of his jaw, the capable hands that held the reins with such ease. He was unlike any man she had ever known, strong but gentle, confident but not arrogant, with a quietness that spoke of inner peace rather than weakness. At the barn, they found Moonbeam restless, pacing her stall and occasionally pawing at the straw. She's starting, Rebecca said, quickly removing her riding gloves. The foal will likely come tonight. Kieran nodded, his expression concerned. I've delivered foals before, but I'm always nervous about it. Too many things can go wrong. Then it's good I'm here, Rebecca said with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. It had been nearly 2 years since she had helped with a foaling, and while she knew what to do in theory, the practice was always unpredictable. They spent the rest of the afternoon preparing, bringing fresh straw for the stall, and ensuring they had everything they might need. Samuel joined them after completing his chores, his experience with horses evident in the calm, efficient way he moved around the barn. As dusk fell, Moonbeam's labor intensified. Rebecca rolled up her sleeves and entered the stall, speaking softly to the distressed mare as she checked her progress. Kieran stood nearby, ready to assist if needed. The foaling went smoothly until the very end, when it became apparent that the foal was in the wrong position. The front legs should be coming first, Rebecca explained, her voice tense. I can feel only one. The other must be bent back. What do we do? Kieran asked, his face pale in the lantern light. I need to try to reposition it, Rebecca said, already rolling her sleeves higher. Can you hold her steady? While Kieran calmed the mare, Rebecca worked quickly, her small hands an advantage as she reached in to find the bent leg and carefully guided forward. It was difficult, messy work, but after several tense minutes she felt the leg straighten. There, she said, withdrawing her hands. Now we wait. Within minutes, the foal emerged, a gangly colt with a coat as black as his mother's. Moonbeam turned immediately to clean her baby, while Rebecca stepped back, exhausted but triumphant. She hadn't realized she was shaking until Kieran wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. That was amazing, he said, his voice filled with admiration. You saved them both. Rebecca leaned against him, suddenly too tired to stand on her own. I just did what needed to be done. Kieran's arm tightened around her, supporting her as they watched the new mother in full bond. You're a remarkable woman, Rebecca Daniels, he said softly. Brave and strong and more skilled than anyone I've ever met. Rebecca looked up at him, struck by the sincerity in his voice. In that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition of feelings that went beyond gratitude or admiration. But before either could speak, Samuel called from the barn door. Mr. Wade, riders coming. Looks like 3 of them. Kieran's expression hardened. Get to the house, he told Rebecca, already moving toward the door. Use the root cellar. Samuel and I will handle this. Fear gripped Rebecca's heart, but she nodded and hurried toward the house, keeping to the shadows. Behind her, she could hear Kieran giving instructions to Samuel, his voice calm but with an edge of steel that reminded her this man was not just a gentle rancher, but someone who had survived a war and the harsh realities of the frontier. Inside the house, Rebecca hesitated. The thought of hiding while Kieran faced potential danger was unbearable. Instead of heading for the root cellar, she grabbed the rifle from the cabinet and positioned herself by the window where she could see the approaching riders without being seen. The men rode into the yard slowly, their horses tired from a long journey. In the fading light, Rebecca couldn't make out their faces, but something about the lead rider's posture seemed familiar. Her blood ran cold as recognition dawned. It was Blackwell, the man who had killed her father. Outside, Kieran and Samuel stood shoulder to shoulder, blocking the path to the house. Kieran's hand rested on his revolver, not drawing it, but making it clear he could if necessary. The riders stopped a few yards away, and the lead man spoke, his voice carrying clearly through the evening air. Evening, gentlemen. Sorry to trouble you so late. We're looking for a young woman, red hair, probably came through here in the last few days. Name's Rebecca Daniels. She's wanted for theft and assault back east. Rebecca's grip on the rifle tightened at the blatant lie. Theft? Assault? She had never committed any crime, had never even left Colorado. Kieran's response was measured, his posture relaxed despite the tension in his voice. Haven't seen anyone matching that description. Not many travelers come this way. We're pretty isolated out here. The lead rider, Blackwell, seemed skeptical. Mind if we take a look around, just to be sure? Actually, I do mind, Kieran replied, his tone hardening. It's late, my men are tired, and I've got a new foal that needs tending. If your fugitive came through here, she didn't stop. There was a tense moment of silence, and Rebecca held her breath, finger hovering near the rifle's trigger. Then Blackwell shrugged. Fair enough. Sorry to bother you. If you do see her, there's a reward. $20 for information leading to her capture. I'll keep that in mind, Kieran said, not moving from his position. The riders turned their horses and rode away, but Rebecca knew they wouldn't go far. Men like Blackwell didn't give up easily, especially when they had something to hide. She stayed by the window until Kieran and Samuel returned to the house, their expressions grim. They didn't believe you, Rebecca said as they entered, lowering the rifle. Kieran shook his head. No, they didn't. But they're tired, and their horses need rest. That buys us some time. Time for what? Rebecca asked, though she already suspected the answer. Time for you to get away, Kieran said, moving to a cabinet in the corner and pulling out a map. There's a place about 20 miles north of here, A cabin that belongs to a friend of mine. He's in Denver for the winter, so it's empty. You'll be safe there until we can figure out a more permanent solution." Rebecca stared at him, a mixture of fear and determination building within her. "I'm tired of running," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "These men killed my father, burned our home, and now they're spreading lies about me. I won't spend my life looking over my shoulder." "What are you suggesting?" Kieran asked, studying her with those penetrating blue eyes. "We fight back," Rebecca said simply. "We gather evidence of what they've done and take it to the authorities. My father kept all our land documents in a strong box buried beneath the floorboards in the barn. If it survived the fire, we could prove that our land was legally ours, that these men are murderers and thieves." Kieran exchanged a look with Samuel, who nodded slightly. "It's risky," Kieran said, turning back to Rebecca. "These men are dangerous, and they've already shown they're willing to kill to get what they want." "I know the risk," Rebecca replied, her chin lifting in defiance. "But I can't keep running forever, and I won't let them take more lives or more land." A slow smile spread across Kieran's face. "Samuel, how do you feel about a nighttime ride?" The big man grinned. "Reckon I could use the exercise." As the men prepared for the journey, Rebecca insisted on coming along. "It's my father's land," she argued when Kieran tried to dissuade her. "I know exactly where the strong box is buried. Besides, if we run into trouble, I can handle myself." She patted the rifle she still held. In the end, Kieran reluctantly agreed, though he made it clear that at the first sign of danger, she was to retreat. They set out just after midnight, riding under a sky filled with stars. The journey was slow, as they had to be cautious of being seen or heard. Rebecca led the way, retracing the path she had taken during her desperate flight just days earlier. Dawn was breaking as they approached what remained of the Daniels ranch. The house was nothing more than a charred shell, the blackened timbers standing like accusing fingers against the pale sky. Rebecca felt a lump form in her throat at the sight, memories of her childhood home overwhelming her for a moment. Kieran's hand on her arm brought her back to the present. "The barn," he whispered, scanning the area for any sign of the men who had done this. Rebecca nodded, pointing to a structure that stood a short distance from the ruined house. The barn had been spared the worst of the fire, though one side was scorched. They approached cautiously, leading their horses through the tall grass to muffle their hoofbeats. Inside the barn, dust motes danced in the shafts of early morning light that filtered through cracks in the walls. Rebecca moved directly to a stall in the back, kneeling on the dirt floor and brushing away loose straw to reveal wooden planks beneath. "Help me lift these," she whispered. Together, they pried up the floorboards, revealing a small metal box buried in the earth below. Rebecca's hands trembled as she dug it out and opened it, relief flooding through her when she saw the contents were intact. Inside were land deeds, receipts of payment, and letters from the Territorial Land Office confirming her father's ownership of the property. "This is it," she said, holding up the documents for Kieran to see. "Proof that my father owned this land legally." Kieran was about to respond when a noise outside caught his attention. He signaled for silence, drawing his revolver as he moved toward the barn door. Rebecca quickly closed the strongbox and tucked it under her arm, her other hand reaching for the rifle she had set aside. Before Kieran could reach the door, it swung open, revealing Blackwell and his two companions, all with guns drawn. "Well, well," Blackwell said, a cold smile spreading across his face. "Look who we have here, the girl who got away, and her new friends." Rebecca felt a cold fear grip her heart, but she forced herself to stand tall. The strongbox clutched protectively against her chest. "You murdered my father," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You tried to steal our land, and now you're spreading lies about me." Blackwell shrugged, his gun aimed squarely at Kieran. "Business is business, sweetheart. Your father should have taken the money we offered. Would have been a lot easier for everyone." "The land wasn't yours to buy," Rebecca retorted, anger overriding her fear. "And even if it was, that doesn't give you the right to kill and destroy." "What's done is done," Blackwell said dismissively. "Now, Why don't you hand over whatever you've got there, and maybe we can all walk away from this?" Kieran's voice was cold as steel. "That's not going to happen. These documents prove you're murderers and thieves. We're taking them to the sheriff in Cherry Creek." Blackwell laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the barn. "You really think the law will side with you over the Rocky Mountain Land Company? We own half the officials in the territory." "Maybe," Kieran conceded, "but murder is still murder, and there are still honest men who'll stand up against it." The standoff stretched, tension filling the barn like a physical presence. Then, from behind Blackwell, a new voice spoke. "I'd say that's about enough." All heads turned to see Sheriff Tanner of Cherry Creek standing in the doorway, his deputy beside him, both with rifles raised. Behind them, Samuel appeared, a satisfied smile on his face. "Samuel went for the sheriff while we were searching for the documents," Kieran explained to Rebecca, not taking his eyes off Blackwell. "I figured we might need some official support." Blackwell's face hardened as he realized he was trapped. For a moment, it seemed he might try to shoot his way out, but then he slowly lowered his weapon, his companions following suit. The sheriff stepped forward, taking the guns. "Mr. Wade sent word yesterday about some suspicious characters asking after a young lady," he said, nodding to Rebecca. "Said you might have evidence of wrongdoing. Looks like he was right." Rebecca stepped forward, handing the strongbox to the sheriff. "My father was murdered by these men," she said, her voice catching. "They burned our home and tried to steal our land. These documents prove the land was legally ours." Sheriff Tanner took the box, his weathered face solemn. "Miss Daniels, I'm sorry for your loss. We'll make sure justice is served." He turned to his deputy. "Get these men on their horses. We're taking them back to town." As Blackwell was led away, he glared at Rebecca, his eyes filled with hatred. "This isn't over," he growled. "The company has resources you can't imagine." "It is over," Sheriff Tanner corrected him firmly. "Murder is a hanging offense in this territory, regardless of who your employers are." After the sheriff and his prisoners had departed, Rebecca, Kieran, and Samuel stood amid the ruins of her former home, the morning sun now fully risen. Rebecca felt drained, the emotional toll of returning here, confronting her father's killers, and nearly dying herself finally catching up with her. "Let's go home," Kieran said softly, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Home. The word brought unexpected tears to Rebecca's eyes. Her home was gone, destroyed by fire and violence, and yet Kieran's ranch had begun to feel like a home in the short time she had been there. "Yes," she agreed, letting him lead her to where their horses waited. "Let's go home." The return journey was slower, all three of them exhausted from the night's events. By the time they reached Kieran's ranch, the sun was high in the sky, and Rebecca could barely keep her eyes open. Kieran insisted she rest while he and Samuel tended to the horses and checked on Moonbeam and her foal. Rebecca slept deeply, dreamlessly, for hours. When she awoke, the room was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. She rose, splashed water on her face from the basin on the dresser, and changed into a clean dress before making her way to the kitchen. Kieran sat at the table, a cup of coffee in front of him, staring out the window with a pensive expression. He looked up as she entered, a smile warming his features. "Feel better?" Rebecca nodded, pouring herself a cup of coffee before joining him at the table. "Much. Thank you for everything you did today. I couldn't have faced those men alone." "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for," Kieran said, his gaze steady on her face. "You survived when many would have given up. You were willing to confront your father's killers to ensure justice was done. That takes remarkable courage." Rebecca felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the coffee. "What happens now?" she asked, voicing the question that had been lurking at the edges of her mind. Kieran's expression grew more serious. "That depends on you. The sheriff will need your testimony at the trial, and there will be questions about your father's land. Without him, the ownership might be contested." "I'm his only child," Rebecca said. "The land should pass to me." "Yes, but there might be legal hurdles," Kieran explained. "Women owning property on their own isn't common out here, though it's not unheard of. We'll need to speak with a lawyer in town." The practical considerations momentarily overwhelmed Rebecca. Her father's ranch was gone, the house destroyed. Even if she could legally claim the land, rebuilding would require money she didn't have, and running a ranch alone would be nearly impossible. As if reading her thoughts, Kieran reached across the table and took her hand. "You don't have to decide anything right now," he said gently. "You can stay here as long as you need to, forever, if you want." Rebecca's eyes widened at the implication behind his words. "Kieran, I'm not asking for anything," he hastily assured her, though he didn't release her hand. "Just offering you a place where you're welcome, where you can heal and decide what you want to do next." The sincerity in his eyes touched something deep within Rebecca. In the short time she had known him, Kieran Wade had shown her more kindness and respect than she had experienced in years. He had taken her in when she was at her lowest, helped her seek justice for her father, and now he was offering her a future, whatever form she wished it to take. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Kieran smiled, squeezing her hand before releasing it. "You would have found a way. You're a survivor, Rebecca Daniels, but I'm glad you didn't have to do it alone." The days that followed settled into a rhythm, with Rebecca helping around the ranch wherever she could. She discovered she had a knack for taming the more skittish horses, and Kieran often sought her advice when dealing with difficult animals. She also took over much of the cooking, finding satisfaction in preparing meals that brought genuine appreciation from Kieran and the ranch hands. As spring deepened into summer, Rebecca's grief for her father began to soften, the sharp edges of loss gradually dulled by time and the new life she was building. The trial of Blackwell and his men was scheduled for late July in Denver, and as the date approached, Rebecca's anxiety grew. "What if they're not convicted?" she asked Kieran one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset over the valley. "What if the Rocky Mountain Land Company's influence is too strong?" Kieran's face was thoughtful as he considered her question. "Justice isn't always certain," he admitted, "but Sheriff Tanner has gathered statements from other ranchers who were threatened by the same men. Your case isn't isolated, Rebecca, and murder isn't something that can be easily brushed aside, even with money and influence." Rebecca nodded, taking comfort in his words. Over the past months, she had come to trust Kieran's judgment implicitly. He was a man of honor, someone who saw the world clearly and faced it with quiet courage. More than that, he had become her closest friend, a person with whom she could share both her darkest fears and her brightest hopes. What she hadn't shared were the growing feelings she had for him, feelings that went far beyond friendship or gratitude. She had caught herself watching him as he worked with the horses, admiring the strength in his hands, the grace of his movements. She had found excuses to be near him, to hear his deep voice and occasional laugh, to see the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. But Rebecca hesitated to speak of these feelings, uncertain if they were reciprocated. Kieran was unfailingly kind and respectful toward her, but he maintained a certain distance, as if afraid to cross an invisible line. Perhaps he still saw her as a victim in need of protection, not as a woman he could love. The journey to Denver for the trial was long but uneventful. Kieran insisted on accompanying Rebecca, unwilling to let her face the ordeal alone. They stayed at a modest hotel near the courthouse, in separate rooms that nonetheless felt too close for Rebecca's peace of mind. The trial lasted 3 days, during which Rebecca had to relive the worst night of her life, describing in detail her father's murder and her subsequent flight. Blackwell and his men maintained their innocence, claiming they had been legally acquiring the land for the railroad and that Rebecca's father had attacked them first. But the evidence was overwhelming. Other ranchers testified about similar threats and intimidation. The land documents from Rebecca's strongbox proved her father had legal title to the property. And most damning of all, one of Blackwell's own men, facing the prospect of hanging, turned on his employers and confirmed every detail of Rebecca's account. On the 3rd day, the jury returned with a guilty verdict. Blackwell and his men were sentenced to hang for murder and to pay restitution for the destruction of the Daniels Ranch. The judge also ruled that the Rocky Mountain Land Company's contracts were fraudulent and void, returning ownership to the original ranchers or their heirs. As they left the courthouse, Rebecca felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "It's over," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "They can't hurt anyone else now." Kieran smiled down at her, pride evident in his expression. "You did it, Rebecca. You stood up to them and won." That night, they celebrated with dinner at one of Denver's finest restaurants, a luxury neither of them was accustomed to. Rebecca wore a new dress she had purchased for the occasion, a deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes. Kieran, too, had made an effort, wearing a black suit that transformed him from rugged rancher to distinguished gentleman. Over dinner, they discussed the future. With the court's ruling, Rebecca was now the legal owner of her father's land, along with a substantial sum in restitution. "I could rebuild," she said, twirling her wine glass thoughtfully. "Start over." Kieran's expression was carefully neutral. "Is that what you want?" Rebecca met his gaze, finding the courage to ask the question that had been on her mind for months. "What do you want, Kieran?" The directness of her question seemed to catch him off guard. He set down his fork, his eyes never leaving hers. "I want you to be happy, Rebecca, to have the life you deserve." "That's not an answer," she pressed, her heart pounding. Kieran hesitated, then spoke with a quiet intensity that made Rebecca's breath catch. "I want you to stay, not as a guest, not as someone who needs protection, but as—" He trailed off, then started again. "These past months, watching you heal, seeing your strength and courage, I've come to care for you in a way I never expected. I know it might be too soon, that you're still finding your way after everything that's happened, but I had to tell you." Joy blossomed in Rebecca's chest, so intense it was almost painful. "It's not too soon," she said, reaching across the table to take his hand. "I've felt the same way. But I was afraid you only saw me as someone to protect, not as a woman you could love." "Love," Kieran repeated, a smile spreading across his face. "Yes, that's the word. I love you, Rebecca Daniels. I think I have since the moment I found you on my land, exhausted and afraid, but still fighting." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears of happiness. "I love you too, Kieran Wade. You gave me back my life. Not just by saving me that day, but by showing me I could be strong again, that I could trust and hope and feel joy." Their return to Cherry Creek was different, the air between them charged with newfound understanding and possibility. Rebecca made her decision she would sell her father's land rather than rebuild. The memories there were too painful, and her future, she now knew, lay with Kieran. In the autumn of 1876, with the aspen trees turning gold against the blue Colorado sky, Rebecca Daniels became Rebecca Wade in a simple ceremony at the church in Cherry Creek. The entire town turned out for the occasion, along with ranchers from miles around, all of whom had followed the trial with keen interest. As Kieran slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, Rebecca thought of how far she had come from that terrified young woman running for her life. The journey had been hard, marked by loss and pain, but it had led her here, to this man who loved her for her strength as much as her gentleness, who saw her as an equal partner rather than someone to be protected. Their first year of marriage brought challenges and joys in equal measure. A harsh winter tested the ranch's resources, but they faced it together, working side by side to ensure their cattle survived. Spring brought new calves and foals, including offspring from the black colt that Rebecca had helped deliver on her first day at the ranch. In the summer of 1877, as they celebrated their first anniversary, Rebecca shared news that brought tears of joy to Kieran's eyes. She was expecting their first child. The baby, a boy they named David after Kieran's brother, was born in the early hours of a snowy February morning in 1878, with the local midwife and Kieran both in attendance. Rebecca took to motherhood with the same determination and grace she had shown in every other aspect of her life. She nursed David while overseeing the ranch accounts, taught him to walk while training young horses, and sang him to sleep with the same songs her mother had once sung to her. As David grew, so did the ranch. With Rebecca's restitution money, they were able to purchase additional land and expand their herd. Kieran's dream of building something lasting became their shared vision, a legacy not just for David, but for the other children they hoped to have. Their second child, a daughter named Elizabeth, arrived in 1880, followed by another son, Michael, in 1883. Their family was complete, 3 healthy children who filled the ranch house with laughter and occasional chaos. Through it all, the bond between Rebecca and Kieran only strengthened. They were partners in every sense, facing the challenges of ranching life with united purpose. The hard times, drought years, illness, the occasional conflict with neighboring ranchers only served to reinforce what they had discovered about each other during those early days, that together they could overcome anything. On a summer evening in 1886, 10 years after Rebecca had stumbled onto Kieran's land, they sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching their children play in the yard. David, now 8, was showing his 5-year-old sister how to lasso a fence post, while little Michael, just 3, toddled after them, determined to join in the fun. "Did you ever imagine this?" Rebecca asked, leaning against Kieran's shoulder. "When you found me that day, did you think we'd end up here?" Kieran's arm tightened around her waist. "Not specifically this," he admitted, his eyes on their children. "But I knew there was something special about you even then, something that made me want to know you better, to see who you'd become once you had time to heal." Rebecca smiled, remembering his words from that first day. "There's a bath and time to heal," you said, "and you gave me both, along with so much more." "You gave me just as much," Kieran replied, turning to brush a kiss against her temple. "A family, a purpose beyond just surviving. You made this place a home, Rebecca." As the sun set over Cherry Creek Valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Rebecca Wade looked out at the life she and Kieran had built together. From the depths of tragedy, she had found love, strength, and a future brighter than she could have imagined. Her hair, once matted from days on the run, now shone in the fading light, a symbol of how far she had come and the beauty that could rise from even the darkest moments. In the years that followed, the Wade Ranch became one of the most prosperous in Colorado. David grew up to take over the operation alongside his father, while Elizabeth surprised everyone by attending college in Denver and returning as the town's first female doctor. Michael, the youngest, found his calling working with horses, developing a breeding program that produced some of the finest quarter horses in the West. Rebecca and Kieran grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They faced the changing times with the same courage and adaptability that had defined their early days together. The railroad eventually did come through Cherry Creek, bringing new opportunities and challenges that they met side by side. On cool evenings, they still sat on the porch, watching the sunset and reminiscing about the strange twist of fate that had brought a desperate young woman to a lonely rancher's door. Neither could imagine a different path, a different life. What had begun in fear and uncertainty had blossomed into a love story that would be retold in Cherry Creek for generations to come, the tale of Rebecca Daniels and Kieran Wade, who found each other amidst the wild beauty of the Colorado frontier and built a legacy of love, courage, and hope.